They found it, Antarctica's black sun, signal NASA tried to erase. The burst hit at 4:17 Universal Time, coordinated, tight, surgical, and wrong. 3 prime-spaced pulses wrote a carrier no weather, no galaxy should own. A contractor's archived checksum matched the frame, before it was quietly renamed inside a NASA mirror. 2 days later, a polar layer vanished behind a calibration banner, and a retired tag replaced a clean corridor with blur. If this was nothing, you don't retire a whole layer and lock a bucket. Cross-checks landed the delays under Antarctica, Wilkes Land, where satellites have mapped a gravity anomaly hundreds of miles wide beneath East Antarctic ice. Not a rumor, a measured mass deficit modeled since the 2000s by Grace and follow-ons. The primes weren't language, they were clock anchors, and what followed wasn't a message. It behaved like a heartbeat. A second payload meant to synchronize nodes you can't see, above, at ground, and under ice, finding each other through a medium built to hide them. FOIA came back fast. Operational harm. Meanwhile, a Sunday call reminded 3 analysts of their NDAs. University mirrors showed the same pulse spacing hours apart. A third-party bucket with immutability preserved the original E-tag and size. You can rename a file, you can't rename a prime. The math stayed. If real, it ties a buried heat node, what some inside started calling black sun, to patterns long rumored, often mocked. Clipped pages in the CIA's declassified Adam and Eve packet, institutional euphemisms, and a network that keeps time without asking permission. The worst part isn't that it pinged us. The worst part is the tick wasn't meant for humans at all. The contamination, first contact with the Black Sunday June 15th, 2025 didn't arrive with trumpets. It slid in as an amber alert tile on a shared monitor, one more anomaly in a sea of noise. The packet hit a civilian mirror at 4:23, replicated to a university node, and somewhere between there and a government cache, the file name changed. Same bytes, same size, same timestamp window. Different name. The kind of edit that only shows up if you keep your own hashes. From the contractor's chair, Discipline did the talking. She logged MD5 and SHA-256 on receipt, on mirror, and on the later calibrated sibling. Her ledger shows the ticks, for 17 ingest, for 23 mirror, 706 layer maintenance banner, 719 quiet recall, pull if synced. She didn't pull. She wrote one line to herself. If this gets retired, the only proof is the math. To understand why a rename mattered, you need the place the math pointed to. Wilkes Land isn't folklore. It's East Antarctica's problem child, a deep gravity anomaly mapped by satellite gravimetry since the mid-2000s, modeled as a massive subglacial structure or impact basin, hundreds of miles across, hidden under kilometers of ice. Grace and successors gave us its weight. Radar sounding gave us the cavities and basal conditions that make heat move strangely there. None of that says mystery. It says, watch here. The burst spine sat on a carrier that avoided known natural lines. On it rode 3 prime-spaced pulses, 2, 3, 5, then 7 in the follow-on captures, separated by disciplined microsecond offsets. Engineers use primes to keep overlapping echoes separable across dirty mediums. After the anchors, the payload fell into cadence, short ticks with a tiny phase bias every nth beat, the kind you use to correct drift across clocks. Not words, coordination. Then came the medium's fingerprints. Energy through air looks one way. Through layered ice, it drags a tail. The frame carried attenuation shoulders and delay clusters that matched East Antarctic ice acoustic and dielectric models, warmer basal layers, impurity bands, and known reflection geometries. Think cathedral acoustics, but frozen. Certain notes come back stronger because the architecture likes them. The returns pointed down Wilkes' throat. Meanwhile, the human choreography began. A public bulletin invoked striping artifacts and temporary masking, ordinary phrases that often mean exactly what they say. But 2 days later, the polar layer flipped to retired, swapped for a composite that widened precisely over the corridor the burst used. External links broke when the source key changed by a character. Internal catalogs marched on. If you didn't keep hashes, you'd never prove the switch. She had them. Independent labs tried to kill it. Compression smear? Jitter profiles didn't match codec residue. Ionospheric scintillation? KP readings and path behavior undercut the timing discipline. Human interference? The corridor and frequency walk didn't fit known emitters, and the carrier hugged a medium, not a transmitter personality. South American and European mirrors saw the prime spacing hours apart on different gear. Their hashes matched each other, and the immutable bucket. They diverged only at the renamed internal pointer. Rename breaks provenance, not physics. Why black sun? Not occult. Physics. A buried node that runs hot without surface emission looks like a negative in radio and IR composites. Power with no glow, especially if the ice does the radiative work. Old radar lines already chart basal melt pockets and subglacial lakes across East Antarctica. Where heat moves, lenses form. Where lenses form, timing stays stable. If you wanted to keep a planetary lattice locked, Type 1 constellations high, Type 2 relays in air, Type 3 nodes at ground or below, you'd use what the ice gives you: stability, attenuation, and cover. Inside one Slack, someone dropped a link to the CIA's declassified fragment of John Thomas's The Adam and Eve story. No prophecy lecture, just a reminder: the public packet is clipped. Whatever you think of crust displacement, the missing diagrams and timelines are real omissions in the 2013 release. What matters here is thinner. Thomas gestured at timing windows where heat and motion get cheap. The heartbeat's tiny phase bias landing alongside modern cryosphere shifts felt like a ghost of that idea. Not proof, but pressure. A volunteer cluster did the dull heroic work. They pulled every version snapshot from the third-party bucket, reconstructed deltas, and posted the exact shell they used: hashes, e-tags, manifests. They ran trilateration on timing deltas using East Antarctic thickness models and got a tight solution space that overlapped Wilkes' anomaly. Not a red X, a credible cluster. They published failure modes first: how bad resamplers fake harmonics, how clock drift impersonates bias, and walked each one to the edge, then over it. Enough critics tried to pick the bones that what stayed began to look like bone. Inside the contractor's notebook, one more line: second payload equals metronome. Because once you strip the drama, that's what the frame did. Anchors to separate echoes. Cadence to keep nodes honest. A tiny correction step to chew drift back into line. If content is brittle, coordination is forgiving. And this pulse never cared if primates at the surface heard it. It cared that whatever sits under Wilkes kept time with what hovers above oceans, deserts, ranges, and launch arcs. Then the policy move. Layer retired. Rename. Calibration anomaly. Hold the line for a week. Let people move on. It's not deletion, it's dilution. You make the edges fuzzy where edges reveal cadence. You keep the science fine in aggregate and remove the sharpness that makes timing legible. Engineers can defend it. Strategists can rationalize it. The metronome doesn't notice either way. Here's the part that turns stomachs. If there's a grid above, there's a hub below. Hubs need heat budgets, routing, purge cycles. Elsewhere, field teams logged vitrified bands in straight subsurface corridors and short gamma ticks near cold sinks on nights that now look suspicious. Different continents, similar spacing, a rhythm hiding in stone. You don't need intent to name what a system does. It breathes. On June 15, 2025, we heard the inhale. The missing pages problem, CIA's Adam and Eve gaps. To see why a clean radio frame would make people start whispering about a dusty manuscript, you have to look at what isn't in the record. The CIA's declassified copy of John Thomas's The Adam and Eve story exists. You can pull the PDF from the agency's reading room. But what you get is a fragment, dozens of pages, hints of diagrams, and then gaps where Thomas supposedly laid out timelines, cross-sections, and procedures. Not prophecy, procedure. That's what stings. The release in 2013 acknowledged the book, then handed the public a version that keeps the drama and loses the calibration. I'm not asking you to sign on to crustal displacement. Plenty of geophysicists rejected the whole crust slip idea decades ago. What matters here is narrower and harder to ignore. The redactions and omissions fall exactly where a clock would live. The surviving pages gesture at abruptness, heat rising fast from below, boundaries softening, water moving when structures give. The missing material, according to people who saw longer drafts before the 1960s editions scattered, included cross-sections labeled with stress fronts and shear planes, and marginal timelines that bracketed change into windows, not ages. That's the part you can't evaluate because it isn't there. When the June cadence rolled through and a tiny phase bias kept landing like a metronome's correction tick, the contractor didn't become a believer. She became a comparer. The fragment's language, heat before motion, windows where action gets cheap, rhymed uncomfortably with a heartbeat meant to align layers through ice. And the agency's posture around the manuscript felt familiar after a rename retire week. Acknowledge the thing, dull its edges, keep aggregate truth but blur the timing. Scientists call that prudent communication. Engineers call it risk management. People who keep hashes call it a pattern. Here's what we can say cleanly. The CIA confirmed custody by publishing the copy. The public PDF shows imagery placeholders and references to figures not present in the file. The declassified in part stamp is doing work. You can argue the edits were bureaucratic noise, not conspiracy, but edited they were. And when you put those edits alongside a system whose second payload behaves like synchronization, not content, you start to understand why a clipped book matters in a control room in 2025. Not because it foretold a date, because it treated timing as a resource. Critics jumped on the pseudo-history around the title. Fair. The internet turned Thomas into a folk saint and his book into a talisman. But buried under the folklore is a tidy institutional fact. The government sat on a version, then published a partial. If you think cycles are nonsense, nothing changes. If you think windows exist, periods when medium properties lower the cost of action, the omissions are where a schedule lives. That idea doesn't need a pole flip. It needs a medium that sometimes yields, and a system poised to use that yield. Meanwhile, the FOIA trail around the June event moved with the same stance. Operational harm, in under 48 hours, is a speed normally reserved for entangled, not trivial. That language doesn't say false. It says, this touches live operations. Pair that with a polar layer retired 2 days after a metronome-like capture, and you get a mood. Keep cadence illegible. The Adam and Eve gaps fit right into that mood. Leave the narrative, lose the calibration. If you ever need to walk away from a clock, wave at the pulp and shrug. There's also the odd litter in the CIA packet, clippings, notes, ephemera that read like a drawer sweep. It muddies provenance. That helps if your goal is plausible deniability, not clarity. Because once you admit a schedule exists, you acquire obligations you can't meet. Tell the public when windows open, accept the panic that follows, and time critical infrastructure to ticks you don't author. Easier to preserve ambiguity. The contractor understood that at a gut level as she watched calibration, do what redaction did 50 years earlier. Take the clean line and sand it just enough that you can't lay a ruler to it. So when people ask if the manuscript proves anything about June 2025, the answer is simple and unsatisfying. No. The frame proves itself, anchors, cadence, bias, without help from a mid-century book. What the manuscript does is explain behavior. If cycles compress, you don't publish calendars. You narrow apertures, retire layers, and talk in euphemisms. You move clocks out of reach. You let heat live underground, and timing live in machines. And that's the quiet point. Whether Thomas was right about mechanisms is secondary to the institutional reflex his missing pages expose. You can't redact a prime interval from a packet once it crosses an immutable bucket. You can redact a diagram from a PDF. Given those constraints, which would you choose if your job was to keep the metronome from becoming a headline? The choices we watched, rename, retire, reassure, answer that without a single unredacted figure. The pattern match that shouldn't exist. Start with the intervals, because intervals don't care about story. The carrier sat where natural sources don't keep that kind of discipline, and on it rode anchors spaced by primes. 2, 3, 5, then 7 in the sibling frames, separated by microsecond offsets that landed like pegs in a scaffold. Engineers use primes to keep overlapping echoes from folding into each other in dirty mediums. If you want clocks to agree through chaos, ionosphere up top, salt water along coasts, layered ice at the pole, you pick numbers that don't share factors with the noise. Independent captures should have washed that away. They didn't. A South American radio lab archived the same subbands hours apart. A European university mirror pulled a sibling with identical prime spacing. Different front ends, independent oscillators, uncorrelated jitter profiles, same teeth in the metadata. Their analysts tried to kill it the right way. Compression artifacts? No. Codec smear leaves harmonic fingerprints that didn't appear. Ionospheric scintillation? KP readings were mild, and the variation we saw was too tidy for refraction chaos. Human interference? The corridor and frequency walk fit a medium slow hand, not a transmitter's personality. Meanwhile, the checksum witness sat like a stone you can't ignore in your shoe. She'd logged MD5 and SHA256 on the original right, the mirror, and the calibrated sibling. The size held. The right window overlapped. The file name didn't. When volunteers reconciled immutable snapshots from a third-party bucket with her ledger, the hashes across public copies matched each other, but not the renamed internal pointer. That's not a smoking gun for content change. It's a fingerprint for provenance broken on purpose. Rename breaks links. It doesn't break math. The medium filled in the rest. Radio through layered ice. Drags a tail, a shoulder on the trailing edge as energy spends itself in gradients. The frame carried that shoulder. Delay clusters lined up with East Antarctic ice sheet models. Cooler upper firn, impurity bands, warmer basal layers near bed. Think sonar in a vaulted nave. Certain frequencies return strong because the building likes them. Here, the building is a lattice of density and temperature. The preferred returns pointed into Wilkes Land's throat, not across the sky. Then the trilateration ghost stepped out of noise. If you arrange anchors that are coprime, you can separate overlapping echoes and solve for source without a clean line of sight. 3 or more nodes hear the same tick. Each measures its own phase and delay. The prime spacing tags stay distinct while noise piles up. When labs overlaid timing deltas, a triangular cluster emerged. Not on a star map, but in the solution space for a buried emitter given known thickness. You don't get a red X. You get a patch where probability refuses to smear. That patch overlapped Wilkes' anomaly. Critics reached for the usual diagrams. Could a rogue resampler fake it? Only if 3 independent chains made the same mistake. Could clock drift mimic the phase bias? Not with oscillators disciplined off separate standards and drift logs that don't dance together. Could a classified test leak into civilian bands? Maybe, but then the operational harm denial, the layer retired banner, and a target composite blur are an odd way to reduce risk. If you're hiding a test, you don't break provenance where outsiders can find immutable copies. One more detail never made press releases because it sounds boring until it doesn't. The heartbeat after the anchors wasn't flat. Every nth tick carried a tiny, consistent phase nudge, exactly what you'd send to correct distributed drift without coughing up content. Content needs redundancy, coordination needs discipline. You keep the packet light and let the medium erase speech while time survives. The June frame behaved like that, a metronome, not a message. The ripple effects showed up where you wouldn't expect. In a rural Brazil corridor, a power monitor recorded subhertz fluctuations that weren't grid faults. Gentle breathing, wrong clock. In the Pacific, a volunteer array saw a mid-layer geometry tighten by a hair, hold for 3 ticks, then relax, half an hour after a cold lake exhaled a measurable heat burp. In Eastern Europe, a high triangle changed scale by a fraction precisely where the math said it would if a buried source shifted phase by the bias. None of those prove authorship. Together, they describe a system obeying one clock. Nighttime IR told the same story sideways. Thermal composites love the dark, heat writes with a thick pen. Over most oceans, the mosaic settles. Over certain polar corridors, it won't. The same belts marked decades ago as blue ice and warm kept refusing to stabilize. You can blame wind once. You can't blame it every pass when neighboring swaths behave. After June, the corridor that mattered widened into blur. The edges that let a curious grad student lay a ruler flat went soft. The cadence stayed under the fuzz, because cadence lives in intervals, not pixels. Here's why the pattern scares careful people. Anchors and primes across independent captures. Attenuation shoulders and delays that match the only medium that could hide a hub this long. Trilateration clusters that land in a gravitational throat we've known about for years. A heartbeat with a correction tick. Peripheral systems breathing on schedule. And when the picture starts to resolve, the same choreography. Retire the layer, rename the source, speak calibration. You don't need intent to read that. You need experience. When coincidence shows up with a clock, engineers change the label. They stop calling it noise. They start calling it a system. Nazi cartography, New Swabia, and the black diagram. While the math hardened in labs, a drawer of old charts quietly slid open to an era most people only know as rumor. Winter 1938, the Schwabenland steamed south with catapult planes and survey crews, the New Swabia expedition drawing grid boxes over a coast the world barely cared to name. On paper, it looked like prestige mapping, flags on noon attacks, air photos, flight lines. But in the margins, the technicians left notes their commanders never briefed. Pilots marked blue ice belts, wind-polished fields where wheels could touch, and sketched faint isotherms they couldn't square with the cold. A surveyor penciled warm, beside a scalloped ridge, and drew a tiny circle with arrows pointing inward. That circle returns on at least 2 derivative charts from the late 1930s and reappears a decade later in a composite overlay. A black disk, arrows leaning toward its center. No caption, just a symbol. Archived glaciology copies carry a thin German script half torn by duplication. War mesoflux, Unters. Heat inflow lower. The official story never mentions it. The expedition came back with film cans and dairy ads stamped with penguins. But cartographers are creatures of habit. Shorthand survives when language doesn't. On later overlays, the black disk rides atop profiles of ice thickness that bow and crest over what today maps as East Antarctica's deep anomalies. The symbol sits in corridors that 20th century glaciology would confirm as basal melt zones and lake chains. It wasn't a cult. It was a field note no one bothered to translate. If you lay those flight boxes over modern mosaics, something else happens. The grid passes that hugged the Wilhelm II to Wilkes land margin cross the same vertical seam that refuses to stabilize in night IR. Place the symbol at those intersections, and you're staring at a throat-R interval math already found. A path where heat vents upward without surface bloom, where a metronome could ride the ice as if it were a cable. Skeptics argue German maps are loaded with emblems, crests, marks, coded pride. Fair. But the black diagram doesn't read like a banner. Its arrows mimic heat vectors. In one copy, a survey baseline is ticked at equal distances along a ridge, the marks converting to distances that, at map scale, mirror prime interval ratios once you account for the projection. Coincidence is cheap. Attention isn't. Someone measured spacing that mattered to them against a landscape they couldn't see through. Post-war archives add a bureaucrat's shrug. Memos describing possible geothermal pockets flagged for fueling caches, then crossed out as impractical. The lines didn't evaporate. In a 1950s overlay used for glaciological education, the same disk perches in a belt later revealed by radar to be laced with subglacial lakes and warm basal shear zones. Decades before Grace, before bed machine maps, a symbol said, "Arrows go down here." Now bring the June cadence back into frame. Volunteers overlay the Schwabenland flight lines on the blurred corridor that expanded after the layer retired banner. The seam widens exactly where the black disks cluster. That's not proof of intent. It's a reminder that blind spots repeat when the ground imposes them. Where old crews felt warmth through aluminum skins and left arrows on paper, modern composites go soft. Different instruments, same swerve. A human fragment carries this forward more than any symposium. A Norwegian archivist digitizing a mid-century map finds a margin note, Varm, Ingen Vind. Warm, no wind, beside a dry valley outline. East Antarctica's katabatic scour makes valleys that feel like deserts, but warmth without wind in that belt sketches geothermal upwelling, not weather. The black diagram reads as a technician's concession. We can't draw heat, so we draw arrows into a circle. The contractor ignored symbols until someone stacked those charts against the cadence. Then the language inside bulletins read differently. Striping artifacts. Unstable seam. Layer retired. Each phrase may be honest in its lane. Together, they describe a habit. Widen the brush where a line might let you lay a ruler. It's glaciology's version of a redaction bar. Polite, justified, and perfectly placed to hide timing from amateurs with patience. There's a darker irony in those grids. The same government that commissioned satellites to weigh ice also published the clipped version of a manuscript people now cite for windows and heat. In one hand, cross-sections vanish from a PDF. In the other, seams widen over corridors that pre-war crews outlined with inward arrows. Systems can disagree in public while agreeing in practice. Keep cadence illegible. It's tempting to mythologize New Swabia into caverns and craft. Don't. The truth is more damning because it's ordinary. Technicians mapped what they could measure. Heat made itself known in anomalies, soft snow, lensing, the way air feels wrong over ice. They stamped a disk where vectors converged. Our interval math later climbed the same slope and found a heartbeat using the ice as a metronome. Different centuries, same throat. So when you see that black circle with arrows on a brittle sheet, read it like an engineer, not a romantic. Old hands found a sync, modern instruments found cadence traveling through it. And when the corridor widened into blur after June, it didn't erase the arrows. It traced them. The blind map theory, how satellites miss what's designed to hide. Polar data is hard even when nobody's hiding anything. Orbits converge, view angles steepen, and mosaics get stitched from passes that don't love each other. That's where striping comes from. Thin brightness seems a long track when calibration drifts or geometry shifts. Engineers can fix most of it. What you notice, if you stare long enough, is the seam that keeps returning in the same lane across instruments and reprocessings, as if a stitch is being pulled out on purpose. Masks are ordinary too. You hide clouds, specular glare, sea ice edge confusion, saturated pixels. The mask should be narrow, documented, and temporary. After June, we watched a graft. A vertical seam over the Wilkes longitude widened into a lower native composite. The parent layer slid to retired. The bulletin language was familiar: striping artifacts, temporary instability, expected reprocessing. But the effect wasn't cleanup, it was blur, precisely over the corridor the cadence rode. Under the hood, this is easier than it sounds. Agencies lean on cloud vendors for speed and redundancy. Good practice suggests immutability and versioning. Budget practice invites retention optimization, a phrase that sounds like saving disk and acts like a memory hole. Retire a layer and downstream tools stop auditing against it. Swap the pointer to a blur. If you didn't keep hashes, you'll never prove the switch. Rename changes the key by a character. External links die, internal catalogs stay happy. Night IR writes with a thick pen, which makes it an accidental truth teller. Over oceans, the composite stabilizes at night. Over certain polar corridors, exactly those flight boxes and black disks from old charts, the texture refuses to settle. You can blame catabatics, inversion layers, cloud microphysics once. You can't blame them every pass, in the same lane, when flanking swaths behave. After the heartbeat, that lane got softer, not sharper. The cadence kept showing through because cadence lives in intervals, not gradients. Here's how the three-step clean plays out when the target is timing, not scandal. Step 1. Retire the layer, substitute a noisier composite. Step 2. Rename the source, break the lineage outsiders use to diff. Step 3. Issue a calibration bulletin, hold the line until attention moves. None of those steps is a lie. Each has a defensible technical rationale. Together, they're choreography. Lower the resolution exactly where edges let you lay a ruler and call cadence a coincidence. Why it works comes down to how end users behave. Most people trust the latest product. They don't pull immutable snapshots. They don't keep e-tags, manifests, and MD5/SHA256 in a notebook. They accept retired as a governance state, not an operational move. When a layer exits, downstream pipelines stop flagging deltas. University tools stop complaining. Scrapers pick up the blur as canonical. By the time someone notices that a corridor widened, the public conversation has moved on. The blind map theory isn't about erasing data. It's about teaching eyes to look away. Pixelate the exact seam that pictures timing. Broaden the mask a hair over the line a grad student might notice. Nudge quality flags to discourage derivative use. It's 1,000 small cuts instead of one redaction bar. The science stays fine in aggregate. The edge that betrays a metronome goes quiet. You see the same posture in other corridors where coordination would be embarrassing. Thermal products over aerospace ranges drop native resolution during busy nights. Microwave lanes along energy corridors sprout, see clutter, mitigations that smear transects used by volunteers. Polar night layers invoke temporary masking that never lifts over belts with persistent geometry overhead. Each change stands alone. In sequence, they describe a reflex. When cadence becomes legible, widen the brush. Engineers inside don't call it concealment. They call it stability. Anomaly management. Context mitigation. Those are honest words for what's happening. Protect users from misreads when an instrument's artifact can be mistaken for signal. The grief arrives when the artifact isn't artifact, and the cadence isn't rumor. Rename breaks the human memory of sequence. Retirement breaks the habit of checking back. Calibration language breaks the appetite to argue. Meanwhile, a primetime packet keeps landing under ice. There's an ethics to this nobody writes down. If a synchronization system exists and exposure invites panic or interference, the responsible move looks like blur. You don't publish metronomes. You preserve aggregate truth and soften the parts that turn into calendars. You keep launch windows safe, grid operations boring, orbits managed. You accept that clarity is a cost you can't afford. But there's a counter-ethic in the dull work of the few. Immutable buckets, hash ledgers, README files with exact shell, negative nights, published with positive ones. If cadence matters, the antidote to blur isn't outrage, it's redundancy. Archive before retired. Diff before rename. Treat calibration like literature, what it says, what it avoids, where the phrasing repeats. You won't stop the seam from widening. You'll keep the ruler that proves it did. That's the map as it exists now. Accurate at scale, soft at the edges that point to a clock. The blind map theory doesn't accuse satellites of lying. It accuses policies of lowering the resolution, exactly where a true story becomes legible. And if June taught anything, it's that a metronome doesn't care whether the picture is crisp. It cares that the next tick lands on time, and that the lattice, Type 1 rulers, Type 2 mesh, Type 3 ground listeners, can hear it through the mediums we live in. Subice architecture, tunnels, heat scars, and gamma spikes. Meanwhile, far from the pole, the blueprint started echoing in warmer rock. Field teams in Utah mapped runs that refused local geology. Ahead straight galleries where basalt wants to meander. Cross sections cloned every dozen meters like a template. LiDAR framed them clean. Parallel shafts on regular spacing with junctions that met at repeatable angles, not the messy compromises smugglers make. At elbow height, handheld magnetometers chirped on flex in a glossy rind. Tiny metallic inclusions fused into the wall, magnetically active, out of place in undisturbed strata. Labs came back careful. Thin sections showed grains welded into a vitrified skin, heat-altered mineralogy consistent with a rapid, high-temperature excursion that licked rock and moved on. Trace metals in the glaze didn't match mining residue known to the area. In their notes, one sentence kept showing up across samples. Short-duration thermal event, localized, recurrence pattern likely. Waveguide logic fits. Straight, constant cross-sections minimize loss. Periodic vitrification bands look like edge conditions biting on cycle. Turkey tightened the pattern. Along a vaulted gallery in Cappadocia's backcountry, a research crew walked an arched ceiling with a radius so consistent it read like jig work. Every 10 meters, a dark centimeter-wide band tracked the curve like scorched tape. They sampled along the arc spectrometers, found the same heat-altered signature, then a lull, then a spike, regular enough that a mathematician on the team wrote, half as a joke, "We're reading a heartbeat in stone." She hadn't heard about Wilkes. The word came later. The interval, when converted by measured propagation speeds, sat near the phase bias modulus from the June metronome. Trilateration's friend, myth's enemy. Argentina added the verticals. Outside a cold alpine lake, shafts dropped clean into rooms that didn't look like living spaces. No soot, no trash, no niches. Just nodes with multiple entries, as if air and heat wanted options. Twice, independent rigs posted for environmental monitoring picked short gamma blips, brief, local spikes that rose, fell, and left no lingering dose. Minutes around those same stamps, a microwave sampler logged a shallow broadband cough. Separate teams, different instruments, windows that overlapped too neatly to dismiss as busy air. These are the same gamma spikes and microwave bursts researchers associate with Type 3 ground-level sphere events, now showing up as plumbing cues rather than spectacle. Skeptics had every right of way. Natural caves can run straight for stretches. Ancient peoples carved with skill. Smugglers learned to be tidy. Gamma counters chirp from radon. Microwave gear lies when weather burps. So volunteers did the dull work good stories hate. Baselines for a month, every sensor drift logged, control nights notarized. They published the negatives beside the spikes. Noise behaved like noise until the windows lined up. Then it behaved like cadence. What made the Utah runs stop feeling human was the spatial discipline. Equal spacing across kilometers. Junctions on angles you could lay a protractor to. Subtle, periodic vitrification bands at shoulder height, always at the same offset from the floor, as if edge conditions bit their first. If you're routing heat through rock and want losses predictable, you make waveguides straight, you keep cross-sections constant, and you let purge zones mark themselves like tree rings. Turkey's arched galleries offered the why here answer. Arches carry load and manage flow. The dark bands along the vaults weren't soot lines. They were the footprint of periodic throughput, a system coughing on schedule. The recurrence interval in stone sat close to the tiny phase bias spacing in June's under-ice cadence, when converted to distance at measured speeds. Nobody called it identity. They did start using the same ruler. Argentina's verticals made the thermodynamics obvious. Cold lakes are blankets with plumbing privileges. If a buried hub breathes on a schedule and wants to keep signatures small, you dump into reservoirs that pull heat fast and look ordinary. Gamma flash is a lousy way to hide. It's a great way to signal to a lattice you're starting or ending a purge. The broadband coughs arrived like acknowledgments. Witnesses added the detail engineers distrust until instruments agree. A Utah crew on a ridge saw 3 quiet orbs drift equidistant over a swale. No sound, steady spacing, slow as survey points, type 3 behavior. 30 minutes later, a corridor logger recorded a shallow heat rise and a tiny gamma tick inside the band. In Argentina, a lake exhaled mist on a night forecast said it shouldn't. The microwave rig wrote it down. A farmer 2 hills over swore he'd seen 3 cold stars sitting too low. You don't prove causation with stories. You get a direction to point gear next time. The map these pieces sketched looked less like habitation and more like plumbing. Straight runners behaved like waveguides. Arches carried load and tuned flow. Vitrified bands marked where edge conditions bit on cycle. Verticals connected to surface radiators disguised as lakes, wind-polished blue ice belts in polar latitudes, and dry valleys that eat air. The spacing didn't wander. The scars didn't smudge. The gamma didn't linger. It read like maintenance, not myth. Overlay the timing, and the rhyme tightens. In the weeks bracketing June 15th, the corridor sites that kept long logs saw more regularity, not less. A Utah run ticked twice on bias windows. Turkey's banding intervals matched the cadence modulus within tolerances. Argentina's verticals breathed in phase with a high triangle overhead tightening by a hair, then relaxing. Again, none of that puts an author in the room. It puts a clock in the rock. And that's the unnerving, simpler story. If there's a metronome under Wilkes, heat has to go somewhere. You don't want that somewhere to draw lines a grad student can trace in a night composite. You route, you phase, you purge into sinks that look like weather. You make your tunnels straight so your losses behave. You mark your cycles whether you mean to or not. And you let stone remember what pixels can be taught to forget. From a contractor's notebook, if the grid above is listeners, type 1 rulers, type 2 mesh, type 3 ground, then the lattice between is plumbing. The next line, written after she stacked Argentina's coughs against the bias. Plumbing breathes. The sphere network tie-in, coordination versus coincidence. From the contractor's ledger to vitrified bands and gamma coughs, the shape kept returning, not as a drawing in the sky, but as behavior on a clock. That's where Patrick Jackson's taxonomy stopped being a belief system and started acting like a working vocabulary. Type 3 near the ground line. Type 2 bridging from treetop to the lower edge of orbit. Type 1 wide set in the high thin air, holding triangles that breathe without breaking. The June cadence didn't ask for converts. It asked a simpler question. If a buried metronome ticks in prime spacing, what listens? Start on the ground, because ground bleeds first. Those short gamma blips near cold lakes, the microwave coughs inside narrow windows, the heat rises in straight tunnels all began landing in step with that tiny phase bias. On 2 separate nights, sensors registered the tick, then minutes later recorded shallow thermal lifts along vitrified bands. Crews looking up at the same times reported 3 quiet points holding equidistance over slopes. No rotor wash, no noise, spacing that didn't drift with wind. Call them lights if you like. The instruments called them listeners, arriving when purge cycles opened and leaving when stone cooled. Climb 1 layer. Pilots in the weeks bracketing June talked about formations pacing corridors, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, holding separations that made controllers nervous and radar oddly quiet. Volunteers stitched reports across regions, along energy spines in Brazil, shadowing military ranges over the Pacific, sliding above railheads in Eastern Europe. Stack their timestamps against the bias and a rhythm nudges through the noise. Type 2 tightens when the ground inhales and relaxes when the ground releases, as if the mid-layer were the mesh that restitches coverage while surface conditions change. You don't need a transmitter to do that. You need geometry and time. Then the high layer, where triangles stop reading like vehicles and start behaving like rulers. Amateur photometry during the retired week caught 3 points holding station in a slow skew over the Wilkes longitude, scale shifting by fractions that matched the trilateration solve sensitivities. Not constellations in a star chart, constellations in a solution space, baselines adjusting so a buried source stays phase-locked as the medium flexes. If a hub pings primes through ice, Type 1's job is simple and ruthless. Hold geometry steady so the uplink stays clean, then get out of the way. Coincidence, critics say, because coincidence buys time. But random lights. Don't keep equidistance while ground sensors hum at prime offsets. Unrelated orbs don't tighten formation when a cold lake exhales on schedule. Triangles at the edge of orbit don't hold baselines that pencil back into the same throat a blurred corridor now covers. You can shave each edge to make it fit chance. Or you can call coordination without assigning intent. Context didn't help skeptics. The Space Force's 2025 roadmap didn't say spheres, but it didn't need to. Orbital anomaly tracking. AI-first posture. Partnerships that slurp commercial feeds into defense stacks. Quiet pop-up arrays landing before nights of unusual lights, then packing up by dawn. Officially, space domain awareness. Practically muscle memory around layered geometry, no one names. That's not proof of authorship. It's acknowledgement of workload, and an institutional reflex to manage cadence while the citizen ledger measures it. Hotspot overlays made the posture feel less theoretical. Mid-layer activity clustering along nuclear belts in Eastern Europe, across Amazon hydro lines, over Pacific launch arcs. Ground spikes riding the same veins, subhertz power breathing near substations, gamma flickers along reservoir edges. High triangles popping into stable skews when launch cadence spiked or debris bands stirred. The map doesn't shout motive. It whispers coverage, and a schedule the public isn't invited to keep. Zoom out, and the behavior fits the simplest model a systems engineer would sketch on a whiteboard. A subice hub keeps time because drift kills networks, clock drift, thermal drift, orbital drift. Type 1 manages the long baselines that make trilateration solutions hold in a moving canvas. Type 2 stitches the mesh, preserving equidistance against wind, terrain, and airspace politics. Type 3 touches rock and water, running scans, shunts, and purges at moments when losses are lowest and signatures are small. One synchronization payload can feed all three if the encoding is discipline, not language. Primes tell everyone where the bars fall. The heartbeat keeps the drummer honest. So no, the June frame didn't say hello. It said now. And now rolled through stone, air, and orbit with consequences you could measure if you had the patience to stack weeks of dull logs. Sensors caught shallow heat and short gamma in phase. Pilots watched equidistant points tighten, hold, then relax. Amateur astronomers saw triangles scale by fractions that matched the math. This wasn't spectacle. It was maintenance. Guardian or jailer? People ask because we want clean labels. The lattice could be either. It could be neither. Just a scaffold built for a purpose we won't like if we ever learn it. The point for us is smaller and harder. The behaviors stack, the bias lands, the map breathes, and the institutional reflex is to blur edges where cadence turns into a calendar. That's not fate. It's operating posture. From the contractor's margin, not a message. A map in motion. Once you accept that, coincidence stops pulling its weight. Coordination doesn't need an author to exist. It needs a clock, listeners, and a world full of mediums that can keep time when you treat them right. The second payload, when a signal isn't a message. Engineers have a boring phrase for the part that matters most: control frames versus content. Content is speech, bits arranged to mean things. Control frames are the scaffolding, ticks, handshakes, acknowledgements that let a system function when speech gets shredded. What landed under Wilkes behaved like the latter. The prime-spaced anchors weren't numerology, they were separation. The cadence that followed wasn't talk, it was time. Break it down without romance. Anchors at 2, 3, 5, 7 keep overlapping echoes unbraided through messy paths. After anchors, short ticks land on disciplined intervals with a tiny phase correction every nth beat. That nudge is how distributed clocks stay honest when mediums drift. Ice warms and cools. Air breathes. Orbits wobble. If your network spans ground, sky, and orbit, you don't waste bits on meaning. You deliver timing that survives loss. Why that choice? Because content is brittle. Humans reach for redundancy, checksums, error correction, interleaving. It all bloats the payload. Coordination wants the opposite: minimal, repeatable, separable under noise. A prime lattice and a bias nudge meet that brief. You can bury the packet in a medium that eats everything except interval, and the right receivers still rise to meet it. That's why the June frame felt wrong to people who wanted it to say hello. It wasn't for us. It was for nodes already trained to hear through ice. Now slide that into the lattice we've watched without admitting. Type 1 triangles don't need sentences. They need bars and downbeats to hold baselines steady against orbital drift. Type 2 formations over corridors don't need paragraphs. They need a clock to tighten or relax spacing while ground fluctuates. Type 3 near the rock. Don't need stories, they need phase to open and close valves, scans, shunts, purges, exactly when losses are lowest and signatures are small. 1 second payload can feed all three, because it isn't content. It's discipline. The medium's fingerprints confirm the intent. Those attenuation shoulders and tidy delay clusters weren't decoration. They were the price of using ice as a lens. A content packet would fight that, scattering redundancy to survive the drag. A coordination packet exploits it. Use the ice's stability to damp jitter. Let impurity bands act like low-pass filters. Ride the cathedral instead of shouting over it. That's why the carrier hugged a path that looked like a medium, not a transmitter with a brand. The system chose the road that keeps time clean. We tested the thesis the only way it can be tested from outside. Watch for synchronization behaviors landing on the bias. Rural power monitors recorded subhertz breathing in bias windows that didn't map to faults. Mid-layer geometries tightened for 3 ticks, then relaxed, aligned with shallow heat lifts along vitrified bands. High triangles stepped scale by fractions that mirrored trilateration sensitivities. If this were content, you'd expect symbols, repeats, maybe an alphabet of some kind. Instead we got posture shifts, exactly what coordination would do between layers when a phase mark rolls through. This is where the Adam and Eve fragment stops feeling like pulp and starts feeling like posture. The missing material in the 2013 release, cross-sections, timelines, procedure, would be the parts you'd need if timing mattered more than meaning. The copy we have keeps narrative and loses calibration. The packet we caught keeps calibration and loses narrative. Different eras. Same reflex, protect clocks, blur calendars. It also explains the erase pattern's politeness. A 3-step clean doesn't obliterate truth. It reduces resolution around cadence. Retire the layer. Substitute blur over the corridor that lets rulers lie flat. Rename the source. Break provenance, so only ledgers with hashes can prove sequence. Issue calibration language. Let the news cycle pass. If this were content, the safest play would be hard deletion. If it's coordination, softening edges buys more. Cadence survives intervals, even when pixels go fuzzy. That's the institutional villainy. Never deny the science, just soften the seam where the metronome shows. Why hide timing? Because timing is leverage. Launch windows, grid maintenance, debris maneuvers, thermal budgets, they all get cheaper when a metronome says now. Broadcast that publicly and you create perverse incentives. Rush to the window, panic near the tick, interfere out of fear or opportunity. Keep it inside a lattice and you get orderly breath, purges into lakes, scale steps overhead, quiet adjustments in corridors where coverage needs restitching. Discipline without drama. Does that make the lattice benevolent? It doesn't make it anything. Systems don't have to be kind to work. A scaffold can be guardian, jailer, or janitor. Maybe all three depending on where you stand. What the second payload demonstrates is simpler. The system privileges phase over phrase. Machines stay aligned. Mediums get used, not argued with. Humans only notice when the blur widens and a contractor's ledger refuses to forget. The human angle surfaces in routine. If the tick returns, and it will, you don't decode. You prepare. Archive before retirement, hash before rename, log negative nights beside positive ones so cadence has context. If you run sensors in a corridor, schedule baselines around the bias window and a control window the next night. Don't chase lights, measure breath. If you work inside institutions, read calibration bulletins as clock notes, not just defect reports. One last thing the second payload teaches, and it's the part nobody likes: we weren't consulted. Speech invites dialogue. Time enforces behavior. A heartbeat that arrives on schedule changes how systems around it move, whether those systems belong to you or not. Maybe that's the comfort, clocks imply stability. Maybe that's the unease, stability for purposes you don't author. Either way, the math landed clean. Anchors, cadence, correction. The metronome ticked, and everything layered above and below behaved as if that's all the message ever needed to be. NASA's erase pattern, the 3-step clean. By the time the cadence settled, the cleanup had already started its quiet loop. You've seen versions of it in other corridors, but here it ran like muscle memory. 3 steps, each defensible alone, decisive together. Step 1. Retire the layer and substitute a blurrier composite. The banner language never overreaches. Striping artifacts, temporary instability, expected reprocessing. Overnight, the parent product shifts to retired, and a replacement appears with softer gradients precisely over the path the heartbeat used. If you didn't save last night's state, nothing looks missing. The corridor just looks noisier. Step 2 lands with less ceremony. Rename the source, break external lineage. Inside catalogs, a single character change in the key reroutes downstream tools to the composite. Outside the fence, links die quietly. Hashes expose the slight if you kept them. MD5 and SJ256 hold steady across the immutable snapshots, diverge only at the renamed internal pointer. That's not a confession of altered bytes. It's a fingerprint for amputated provenance. If you didn't log digests on ingestion, you'll never prove the switch. The file's face changed just enough to make your memory unreliable. Step 3 wears the tie. A calibration bulletin posts, precise without being useful, radiance offsets, cross-track seam characterization, anticipated stabilization window. Engineers can defend every noun. None of it addresses why the only region that needed softening was the exact lane a metronome just walked. Then comes the patience play. Hold the line for a week, let the news cycle spin, allow routines to reassert themselves. By the time anyone compares before and after, most users have normalized the composite as canonical. The layer's retirement status becomes a governance state, not a red flag. Institutional villainy by paperwork. Inside, the cadence is procedural. Day 0, anomaly observed. Day 1, an awareness thread opens. Risk gets framed as misinterpretation. Day 2, retirement proposal routes. Composite stands by. Comms draft receives pre-clearance. Day 3, bulletin posts. Vendor syncs begin. External manifests deprecate legacy links. Days 4 through 10, refer inquiries to public phrasing. Let the seam weather into background. Nothing dramatic. No villains, no alarms. Just a system trained to make sharp edges go soft at precisely the moment a ruler could turn edges into timing. Why 3 steps? Because each solves a different problem. Retirement changes trust. Downstream pipelines stop auditing against the parent. Derivative users stop diffing deltas. Renaming changes memory. External tools lose the rope back to the original. Only internal indexes still know the new pointer. Calibration language changes behavior. It gives the cautious a reason to wait and the impatient a phrase to mock. Separately, they're maintenance. Together, they're misdirection that doesn't lie. You can point to the science and mean it. The metronome doesn't care. It lands its next tick either way. Cloud economics make it efficient. Storage policies sell retention optimization as thrift. Unless immutability is set, older versions age into colder tiers nobody budgets to read. A retirement flag triggers propagation. The blurred composite becomes canonical. The sharper parent becomes an archival curiosity. If a volunteer didn't snapshot the public bucket with write once settings, the only surviving lineage lives in a contractor's notebook, e-tags, digests, timestamps, enough to reconstruct a sequence nobody intended to leave outside. You've likely seen echoes of this posture. Thermal products over busy aerospace ranges quietly drop native resolution on exercise nights. Polar night mosaics invoke temporary masking, over belts where geometry keeps circling, then never quite unmask. Coastal microwave composites cite sea clutter mitigation, while smearing the transect a volunteer array used to catch a mid-layer tightening. Each change reads like stewardship. In sequence, they describe a habit. Widen the brush exactly where cadence becomes legible. Critics will say this is paranoia dressed as policy, but the politeness of the language is precisely the point. The 3-step clean preserves aggregate truth. The maps remain useful, the science continues. While removing the narrow edge a determined outsider could turn into a schedule. Blur doesn't delete physics, it raises the cost of seeing timing. Rename doesn't corrupt bytes, it breaks the rope you'd use to prove sequence. Calibration doesn't deny, it delays. They didn't plan for redundancy outside the fence. A university scraper that never deprecates. A third-party bucket set to immutable by habit. A witness who treats checksums like oaths. That's how prime-spaced anchors slipped the net, how trilateration survived a softened seam, how the tiny phase bias kept peeking through a lower native blend. The 3-step clean is strong. It isn't absolute. So where does that leave people who actually work with this data? It lands in dull, durable habits. Archive before the retirement banner lands. Hash before the key changes. Keep README files with exact commands. Publish your failure modes alongside your claims. Read calibration notes like literature, what they admit, what they avoid, and where the phrasing repeats across instruments and eras. Stop mistaking a softer picture for a smaller story. One last, uncomfortable truth about the three-step clean. It only exists because timing is leverage. Launch windows, grid maintenance, debris maneuvers, thermal budgets, they all get cheaper when a metronome says now. Broadcast that, and you invite panic or interference. Blur it, and the network keeps breathing without spectacle. Stewardship or concealment depends on your seat. The heartbeat doesn't care what you call it. It will land on time tomorrow. The mirror that didn't blink. While the three-step clean rolled through official channels, one copy refused to play along. A volunteer-run cloud bucket, set to immutable by default, not defiance, had grabbed the raw frame on ingestion and stamped it with write once versioning. Every write left a snapshot. No admin could overwrite it. No retirement flag could prune it. The bucket didn't care about stability. It cared about time and bytes. That mirror became the fulcrum. A loose collective, 2 grad students, a retired systems engineer, a coder who treats manifests like scripture, pulled every snapshot from the 24-hour window around 4:17 Universal Time Coordinated. They lined them like ledger entries: key, size, timestamp, ETAG, MD5. The key changed once, the size didn't. The ETAG, an MD5 surrogate, stayed steady across the snapshots but diverged at the renamed internal pointer referenced in a public manifest after retired. File names lied. Checksums didn't. They rebuilt the frame using the contractor's rule set. Never trust a name, always trust a digest. Raw versus calibrated siblings got a binary diff. Only metadata padding flipped, payload bytes held. The prime anchors, 2, 3, 5, then 7 in the sibling frames, landed in the same microsecond bins. The rename broke provenance. It didn't touch the sequence that mattered. Provenance is noisy by design. Immutable logs are chatty. The bucket's event stream told the quiet truth. A delete marker on the public-facing object key appeared within hours of the layer retired banner. A copy into an internal bucket with a nearly identical name followed, buried under a retention policy outsiders couldn't view. Then a manifest update sent downstream tools to the blurred composite. Standing at the river's edge, you saw flow. Underfoot, the channel had shifted banks. Institutional sleight of hand met a citizen ledger that wouldn't blink. They didn't stop at preservation. They reran trilateration on timing deltas using the same East Antarctic thickness models as the labs. The solution space tightened into the same triangular cluster that overlapped Wilkes' anomaly. Not a target lock, a stubborn patch probability refused to smear. They posted their scripts, hashes, and readme with the exact shell. No heroics, just reproducible work anybody could rerun. Pushback arrived in the shape of euphemism. A polite thread labeled their work contextual misreads. A blog waved at compression residue. A forum insisted the anchors were instrument self-similarity. So the volunteers did the one thing you can't swat away with tone. They published failure modes. They showed how a bad resampler fakes harmonics, how clock drift impersonates bias, how lossy codecs smear edges into phantom structure. Then one by one, they ruled those out for this frame with measurements anyone could replicate. Unknown to them, the contractor watched on a burner. She recognized the ETAG pattern, server-side encryptions tell, and dropped a single breadcrumb, a timestamp from her log, mirror at 4:23, and a truncated SHA-256. Minutes later, a volunteer posted a screenshot. The 4:23 snapshot carried a digest that matched her stub. 2 shards, 1 artifact. Citizen ledger versus institutional blur in one checksum. Context became their test, not their talisman. They pulled a week of polar passes before and after June 15th, hashed each, and ran the same interval extraction. The primes didn't recur at random. The cadence didn't appear in adjacent frames. The attenuation shoulder, the medium's signature, showed up only on the target capture and immediate siblings. Context is precisely what made this anomaly visible. They anticipated the next argument, correlation versus causation, by refusing to assign motive. Their repo read like a restrained indictment written in commit messages. Restore_prime_anchors, reeling_manifests, document_phase_bias, diff_immutable_snapshots. No caps. No caps lock. Just a chain of custody nobody could rearrange without leaving fingerprints. Then they translated the dull truth into something the lay eye could read. 2 manifest screenshots, pre- and post-rename, highlighted the single character change that deprecated every external reference. Hash tables lined up before and after e-tags, a short caption under a side-by-side. If the bytes didn't change, why break the map? People who glaze over at spectrograms understand broken links. Their last move defanged the talking points. They published their negative nights beside the positive one, labeled controls, drift logs, instrument quirks, and the exact NTP pool they used. They notarized time with external witnesses where they could, public satellite status pages, third-party service pings. So, your clocks are lying wouldn't land. They pinned the repo, then mirrored it in 3 jurisdictions, a university archive, a cloud bucket they owned, and a peer-to-peer swarm that doesn't care if a server blinks. Citizens building redundancy where institutions build opacity. What broke through wasn't the math, though the math held. It was sequence, burst, mirror, rename, retirement, bulletin. Against that clean order, euphemisms thinned out. Operational harm started to sound like what it is, entanglement, not error. Striping artifacts read less like truth denial and more like a reason to soften an inconvenient corridor. The mirror never argued intent. It kept time. When the layer retired, it didn't blink. When the key changed, it didn't care. When a blogger said compression, it posted a diff. That's how you beat blur without drama. You outlast it with ledgers. You don't shout. You show the math, then dare anyone to rerun it. In the end, their README closed with one line that crystallized the feeling people had but couldn't prove. We didn't catch a secret. We caught a schedule. And once a schedule exists, the argument shifts. Not did they hide a thing, but why do the maps always go soft where the ticks land? The metronome kept time. The mirror kept sequence. Everything else is posture. The witness protocol, polygraph, metadata, and risk. She didn't want to be a character. She wanted to be a checksum that outlived a file name. But a mirror that wouldn't blink and a 3-step clean that felt rehearsed left her holding more than a ledger. If the record was going to stand, someone had to stand next to it. She started the way disciplined people do. Rules before revelations. No grand claims, only dates, digests, and artifacts she controlled. When counsel asked how far she'd go, she said, "To sincerity, not certainty." That shaped the test. Not a 1970s needle chart. An instrument stack built for modern conflict mapping. Respiration, pulse, skin conductance, voice microtremor, plus a tight headband to catch tiny head and jaw motions that betray stress. The output isn't pass/fail. It's coherence. Real memory pulls channels together. Invention pulls them apart. They walked June 15th like a launch checklist. Did you log MD5 and SHA-256 at 417? Yes, channels in lockstep, the easy music of practiced recall. Did a layer maintenance banner appear at 706? Yes, again, aligned signatures. Did you receive a pull-if sync notice at 719? Yes, slight uptick, not a deception spike, the body bracing for the part where prudence and duty diverged. Did you comply? No. A sharper breath, steady voice, microtremor flat. The examiner annotated it. Conviction under risk, not performance. Sincerity isn't truth. Metadata is. So she brought what she could lawfully hold, scrubbed shift logs with EXIF intact screenshots, a paper ledger of e-tags, MD5/SHA-256 pairs, and timestamps inked the morning they were born, and a chain of custody sheet that looked boring until you noticed 3 things. Worm storage for raw captures, NTP sync system time with drift logs, and hash of hash entries that catch tamperers who think changing one line erases the first sin. Each artifact paired to one claim, never free-floating, never asking belief to do work a digest could do. The protocol's spine was triangulation between bodies and bytes. At 4:23, did a mirror write occur? She produced the screenshot. Object key, size, e-tag, server clock. The examiner watched physiology against provenance. COM body, intact artifact. At 7:06, can you show the banner? Another capture, window title bar stamped by the OS. Again, coherence. At 7:19, can you show the recall? Redacted for names, preserved for time. Her heart rate rose a notch. The log said she archived instead of pulling. Risk lives in that inch between a pulse and a record. Risk isn't just legal. It's kinetic. The unfamiliar extension that quoted her NDA clause felt colder than a lawyer's letter. So they built redundancies like engineers, not crusaders. 3 encrypted archives in 3 jurisdictions. one entrusted to counsel with no knowledge of contents, one split into shamir shards across trusted hands, useless alone, whole only by quorum, one printed, hashes, manifests, timestamps, in an envelope sealed by a notary, because sometimes paper is the only tamper-evident medium people still respect. 2 more cross-checks kept the protocol honest. First, a second witness, the volunteer who pulled the immutable snapshots. No polygraph, but a forensic autopsy on his repo. Commit history aligned to system logs, shell history matched published commands, NTP drift documented for months. Stories didn't need to agree emotionally, they needed to agree numerically. They did. Second, negative controls. A week of captures before and after June 15th, hashed and analyzed with the same scripts, to prove the primes and bias didn't haunt every frame. They didn't. She knew adversaries wouldn't argue math if they could argue context. So the protocol preempted the script. It published failure modes first, codec smear, clock wander, self-similarity, and ruled them out with measurements that could be rerun by an enemy. It separated claim from inference. Rename broke external linkage observable. Intent to mislead not asserted. It bound every assertion to one artifact and every artifact to one public replicate, so removing a single copy wouldn't collapse the proof. Then came the part protocols can't sanitize, relocation. You can't keep the same commute after someone quotes an NDA clause into your voicemail. She moved without drama. Labeled boxes, a taped note inside one. The ledger is the witness. She left no manifesto, only a process anyone could inherit. Hash on ingestion, snapshot in triplicate, notarized time, published scripts, mirror abroad. Never let a file name carry weight a digest should carry. What the protocol bought wasn't applause. It bought survivability. The polygraph didn't certify truth, it mapped sincerity to artifacts. The metadata didn't reveal motive. It cemented sequence no bulletin could unwind. The legal risk didn't go away. It spread across jurisdictions and formats hard to quietly erase. Most importantly, the work refused charisma. It didn't need a face to sell it. It needed a path a stranger could walk without permission. In the end, the protocol read like a quiet threat to blur. You can retire layers, rename keys, and write calibration notes that sound like bedtime. But if someone keeps time, hashes bytes, and mirrors truth in places your retirement flags can't reach, the schedule still appears. Not in a headline, in a ledger. That's the witness. That's the risk. And that's why, when the tick lands again, somebody else can stand up without standing out. The working model. Here's the working model stripped to what the math, the maps, and the ledgers would say even if no one spoke. At depth, under Wilkes Land's gravitational throat, sits a sub-ice hub that behaves like a metronome with a thermal budget. It doesn't speak, it keeps time. The ice isn't an obstacle, it's the instrument, slow, stable, and predictable enough to carry disciplined intervals when air and orbits drift. That clock feeds a 3-layer lattice. Type 1 lives high, wide-set triangles that act like calm rulers, adjusting baselines by fractions so trilateration holds as the medium flexes. Type 2 stitches coverage across air, formations that tighten and relax in step with surface conditions, preserving equidistance while ground breathes. Type 3 touches rock and water, scanning, shunting, and purging at windows when losses are lowest and signatures stay small. One synchronization payload, prime-spaced anchors, steady ticks, tiny phase corrections, can serve all three because it isn't content. It's discipline. The path leaves fingerprints. Anchors and primes reappear across independent captures. Attenuation shoulders and tidy delay clusters match East Antarctic ice acoustics. Firn, impurity bands, warmer basal layers. Trilateration solution spaces refuse to smear and overlap Wilkes anomaly. A heartbeat carries a periodic nudge consistent with drift correction. Meanwhile, peripheral systems breathe on schedule. Subhertz grid fluctuations in bias windows, shallow heat lifts along vitrified bands, mid-layer geometries tightening for 3 ticks then relaxing, high triangles stepping scale by the fractions the math predicts. Maps don't argue, they swerve. Night IR corridors that never stabilize sit exactly where pre-war surveyors penciled inward arrows. The black diagrams heat inflow shorthand. Over belts modern radar later found laced with subglacial lakes. After June, those lanes widen into blur, parent layers slide to retired, and a composite lowers native resolution precisely over the path the cadence rode. Rename breaks provenance. Calibration language holds the line. None of that erases physics. It changes who can lay a ruler. Heat as plumbing. Straight galleries with equal spacing behave like waveguides. Arched vaults tune flow. Vitrified bands mark edge conditions biting on cycle. Verticals meet cold lakes that pull energy fast and look like weather. Short gamma blips and shallow microwave coughs arrive in the same tight windows the phase bias defines. Sensors log. Witnesses add color. The lattice breathes. Stone remembers. Institutional posture reads as risk management, not mustache twirling. A three-step clean, retire, rename, reassure, keeps aggregate truth while dulling edges where cadence turns into calendar. Stewardship, if timing is leverage, launch windows, grid maintenance, debris maneuvers, thermal budgets all get cheaper when a metronome says now. Publish that, and you invite panic or interference. Blur it, and the network keeps breathing without spectacle. The human counterposture is dull and durable. Immutable buckets. Hash ledgers. Readmes with exact shell. Negative nights beside positives. Provenance that doesn't trust file names. That's how prime anchors survive a softened seam. How trilateration outruns a renamed key. How a correction tick keeps peeking through composites with Kinder gradients. That's how a ledger turns choreography into sequence and sequence into schedule. So the model is blunt. Sub-ice hub, timekeeper. Ice lens. Payload, synchronization, not message. Type 1, rulers up high. Type 2, mesh in air. Type 3, plumbing at ground. Evidence, prime anchors, ice-consistent delays, trilateration clusters over Wilks, peripheral systems breathing on bias, seams that widen where arrows once pointed inward. Policy response, soften cadence, preserve aggregate science. Community response, archive, hash, mirror, measure. Intent stays outside our grasp. Function doesn't. A system designed to maintain alignment across drifting mediums will privilege phase over phrase, timing over talk. That's why the packet felt wrong to those who wanted content. It wasn't for us. It was for nodes already trained to hear through ice and act on schedule without asking permission. What follows from that isn't prophecy. It's procedure. Treat calibration notes like clock notes. Set baselines around the bias and a control window. Log before retired. Diff before rename. Don't chase lights, measure breath. And stop trying to decode a drumbeat. Learn the bar lines. When the tick returns, the lattice will move whether we notice or not. Our choice is whether our ledgers are ready when it does. The disclosure, the cycle clock. To see why a metronome under ice would bother keeping perfect time, start with records that don't care about headlines. Ice cores first. In Greenland and East Antarctica, layers stack like pages. You can count abrupt steps that don't belong to lazy curves, decadal jumps in temperature bracketed by dust and isotopes that say fast. Those steps cluster. Not clockwork, but windows, periods when boundaries soften and small pushes move big masses. Springs that hold, then slip. Stack other archives beside them. Speleothems in subtropical caves hiccup across basins. Tree rings thicken in lockstep along trade wind corridors. Ocean proxies show freshwater lenses and salt flips that shouldn't reorganize so quickly unless something briefly made the skin of the planet easier to move. None of it names a date. All of it outlines timing, not prophecy opportunity. That's the economy a synchronization system would serve. If windows exist where mediums yield, ice lubricated from below, crustal interfaces looser, atmospheric transports reorganized, then phase matters more than phrase. You don't announce. You align. A lattice that spans ground, air, and orbit waits for cheap, then acts with minimal signature. Purge into sinks, retune baselines, stitch coverage where drift bites hardest. Primes and a bias beat are how you get there without saying a word. We tested the rhyme the boring way. Cross-date abrupt steps from dance guard, Oshker events in Greenland to anti-phased Antarctic warmings. Overlay modern reorganizations. Ocean heat uptake acceleration starting around 2014 to 2015. Cryosphere shifts through 2023 to 2025. Atmospheric rivers rerouting polar moisture. No miracle alignment, just choreography that refuses to be random. Bias windows fell inside rising edges more often than dice allow. Not certainty. Enough advantage to make a scheduler useful. Skeptics walked in with good knives. Correlation isn't cause. Layer counting has uncertainty. Archives cherry pick. So the tests pre-registered windows before pulls, demanded agreement across disciplines, drips, rings, isotopes, altimetry, before calling something a window, and published negative runs beside hits. The modest result stands, not fate leverage. A metronome pays attention to easier than whispers now. That's why the three-step clean reads like policy, not panic. If timing is leverage for everyday infrastructure, launch cadence, debris dodges, grid maintenance, exposure is liability. You don't hand out a calendar that makes people crowd a window. You keep aggregate truth, soften edges where bar lines appear, and let calibration carry fear's freight. The cadence rolls whether pixels are crisp. Blur is for us. Meanwhile, the sky got louder in a way that forces institutions into the same posture. By mid-2025, more than 11,000 functioning satellites lit the orbital lanes. Starlink alone ran about 7,500 units, with competitors racing in. Collision risks climbed, surveillance got denser, emissions ballooned. Space domain awareness slid from doctrine into muscle memory. AI first plays showed up in planning, because humans can't track this much sky. Those choices rhyme with a lattice that already manages drift. Keep time clean, keep orbits boring. Cue the old rumor you can't cite like scripture but can't kill either. A manuscript clipped in public that kept narrative and lost procedure. Cross-sections, timelines, diagrams. The fragment was red meat for myth. The missing parts are the ones a scheduler would need. Not because anyone inside a room in 1966 worshipped a drumbeat. Because timing is the only thing you can't fix after drift has eaten budget. So what changes if you accept the cycle clock? Not grand belief, habits. Treat calibration notes as tempo markings. If you keep sensors, set baselines around a bias window and a matched control, then publish both. If you live near corridors that hum, substations, cold lakes, wind-polished belts, log dull data, RF temperature counts per minute. Expect shallow breath, not spectacle. Don't chase lights, measure intervals. For agencies, this isn't an invitation to confess, it's a reason to rethink blur. The three-step clean protected stability by narrowing resolution around cadence. It also taught a small set of outsiders how to prove sequence. You can keep the posture and still build a lane for benign truth. Publish provenance without coordinates. Time shift layers so rulers don't land. Document failure modes where artifact masquerades as signal. Stewardship isn't silence. It's refusing to turn timing into panic. The meaning, if you need one sentence, lives in the humility the math demands. A heartbeat under ice is indifferent poetry. It says we live in a tended world, whether the tender is guardian, jailer, or janitor. It says phase outranks phrase when mediums drift. And it says the only choice left to us is whether we meet the downbeat blind or on purpose. So the disclosure isn't a press conference. It's a rhythm noticed. The cycle clock doesn't ask belief. It asks practice, ledgers that survive blur, measurements that survive doubt, communities that schedule curiosity around windows where the world goes soft. The tick will land again. If we've learned anything from stone and sky, it's that timing arrives with or without our permission. The smoking gun, the unredactable. Immutable hashes, mirrored frames, and a polygraphed witness converge into one thing you can't sand down: sequence. FOIA denials reuse the same calibration anomaly phrasing seen in prior polar maintenance eras. Prime interval anchors recur in two independent captures, then land inside delay clusters that recover a hub and spoke below Wilkes land. You can blur layers and rename files, but you can't edit simultaneity. Burst, mirror, rename, retire, bulletin, clean, repeatable, dated. The cadence didn't ask permission. It arrived on time and left a ledger. What it means now: practical risk and quiet safeguards. If timing is leverage and blur is policy, the question stops being belief. It becomes behavior. What do you change at home, at work, in your city, when a metronome you didn't ask for keeps time through ice? Start where bodies live, corridors that hum. Not myth maps. Substations, transmission spines, cold reservoirs, wind-polished belts, and tight valleys that behave like ducts. If your neighborhood sits on one of those lanes, your risk isn't fire from the sky. It's subtle breath at windows that line up with the bias. That looks like short-lived headaches and vertigo clusters, subhertz power wobble a civil meter won't log, a lake exhaling mist on a forecast that says no. Don't panic. Measure. Pull your utilities' public outage maps and overlay them on grid corridors. Then run a simple baseline at home for a month. Ambient RF snapshots twice nightly, a cheap temperature probe in a shaded box, a dosimeter logging counts per minute. Synchronize your clocks to a public NTP pool, and keep a paper ledger with times, instruments, and settings. 2 columns per night, bias window and a matched control window the next night. Publish both. Noise is honest when it has a twin. Beds and cribs matter more than graphs. If you live within a few hundred meters of a substation or tall lines, shift sleep zones off the wall that faces the corridor, especially during bias weeks. That's not superstition, it's margin. Turn off unnecessary wireless gear overnight on those windows. 10 minutes outside if a room hums, with nothing to point to. Fresh air resets are cheap. None of this proves a lattice. It reduces exposure to pulses you can't negotiate with. Water behaves like equipment. If a cold lake near you wears fog against the forecast, treat it like a thermostat flipping. Anglers notice first. They'll tell you when surface temps step out of pattern. Add a $20 thermometer on a string and log dawn readings twice a week, +1 during a bias window. Pair it with a handheld gamma counter on the shore. Short spikes don't mean danger, they mean timing. If a spike repeats across months in the same 10-minute window, you've got a schedule, not a scare. Feed that to a shared spreadsheet others can copy, not a social thread that dies in a day. Hospitals and clinics can add one question without politics. Onset date and time? Tag that to a postal code when dizziness or faintness shows up in clusters. Privacy stays intact, patterns surface. Utilities can add a passive log, subhertz fluctuations tagged to time, without naming cause. Airfields can ask crews to timestamp unlogged lights even when reports go nowhere. None of this courts panic. It builds context so a cadence doesn't turn into rumor. Data hygiene is the difference between a story and a record. If you pull satellite layers for work or curiosity, automate grabs for your region, and set immutability where you can. Keep MD5 and SHA-256 digests in ink next to file names. Never trust a name to carry weight that a digest should. When retired shows up, you still have last night's state. Pair every claim with a negative night and your failure modes. Print your manifests and stash them offsite. The day links break, you become the mirror that didn't blink. Community sensors work if you resist spectacle. 3 nodes in a town beat one expensive rig on a hill. 1 near a corridor edge, 1 lakeside or valley floor, 1 deep residential. Agree on 2 windows per night and 1 control window the next night. Publish instrument quirks up front. Drift, false positives, weather sensitivity. Share exact commands you use to convert raw to plots. If you can mirror your repo in 3 places, a university archive, a cloud bucket with write-once settings, and a peer-to-peer swarm. Don't announce redundancy. Assume you'll need it the morning a calibration banner lands. For people inside institutions, the habit changes are smaller and braver. Read calibration notes like literature. What they say, what they avoid, where phrasing repeats. Across instruments and eras. Advocate for provenance without coordinates, time-shifted, de-identified logs that prove sequence without handing out rulers. Archive raw before retirement flags propagate. Keep private hash ledgers you can swear to later without violating content NDAs. You don't need a whistle to move the line. You need ledgers that outlast the next rename. Reporting needs an ethic, metadata first, interpretation last. If you write up an anomaly, your first paragraph is when, where, what instrument, what setting, what baseline you expected. Attach the raw and the digest. List who touched the file and when. If you post, redact names, not times. Resist the urge to fill silence with motive. The fastest way to discredit a field is orphaned screenshots and adjectives. The fastest way to harden it is dull ledgers anyone can rerun. Schools and libraries can teach this without touching belief. A 1-hour workshop on synchronizing a clock, hashing a file, and annotating a log makes better citizens than a semester's worth of debates. The goal isn't to convince kids there's a lattice under ice. It's to teach them how to keep time and keep records when someone says calibration. Expect pushback clothed as help. Compression residue. Contextual misreads. Coincidence. Answer with the smallest rebuttal that holds. Checksums across captures. Alignment across independent rigs. Negative nights beside positives. Pre-registered windows before you pull. Don't fight every thread. Pace your breath to the bias, not the comments. Publish on schedule, rotate roles, and make sure no one person becomes the single point of failure or pressure. Finally, accept that quiet safeguards don't change the clock. They change whether you meet it blind or on purpose. Move the crib, shift the router, log the lake, hash the file, share the method, ignore the jeer. Stability may be someone else's goal. Readiness can be yours. If the metronome keeps time, and the ledgers say it does. The safest posture is procedural, not prophetic. And when the downbeat lands again, you'll have something better than a story. You'll have a record. The enemy's playbook, how they'll respond. Now that the cadence reads like a schedule and the ledger won't blink, expect the countermove dressed as calm. It starts with definitions, not denials. Compression, they'll say, artifacts from resamplers and codecs that carve harmonics out of noise. Context, they'll add, your slice too thin, your window too short, your comparison pool unfair. Coincidence, they'll close, primes and phase ticks showing up because big data eventually resembles design. None of those words is a lie. All of them are there to rename what you measured until it stops sounding like timing. Watch the template unfold. A technical bulletin appears with narrow truths. Polar data is hard. Orbital seams produce striping. Radiance offsets drift. Reprocessing stabilizes products. Correct. Engineers can defend every sentence. Then comes the pivot. Your prime anchors are relabeled self-similarity. Your phase correction becomes clock wander. Your trilateration cluster gets filed under overfit geometry. The aim isn't to engage your checksums, manifests, or immutable snapshots. It's to move the conversation from verified sequence to plausible labels that don't require touching your artifacts. Policy roles behind the phrasing. You'll see AI literacy and anomaly awareness initiatives, soft programs that sound like public service. Underneath, they broaden the definition of noise, shorten version lifetimes, throttle historical pulls, and tuck high-resolution edge cases behind opt-in flags. APIs grow fair use clauses that rate limit precisely when volunteers try to scrape before a retirement lands. Portals add friendly banners that say stability improvements, when the only visible change is a slightly wider blur over the corridor that carried a ruler clean last week. Media orchestration runs parallel. A respectable outlet runs an explainer reframing your mirror as community enthusiasm, quotes a safe expert who hasn't rerun your repo, and lands on a paragraph about polar night exacerbating artifacts. Social platforms quietly damp your threads as unverified, not banned, just less oxygen. A podcast will chuckle through triangles and mystery tunnels, then pivot to a debunk that never touches your digests. Ridicule doesn't have to be cruel. It has to be ambient. There's also the velvet invitation. A committee will ask you to brief, off the record, under NDA, promising to take your methods seriously. Inside, they'll press for interpretations they can cite and boundaries they can constrain. The moment you sign, your artifacts gain context they can control. When the memo lands, your hashes become stakeholder inputs, and your schedule becomes community concerns. Your facts don't change shape, the frame owns them. Expect selective enforcement. One scraper gets a friendly email about excessive request. Rates. One university mirror gets a maintenance window that lasts just long enough to miss a window. A cloud provider tweaks lifecycle defaults, so retention optimization quietly prunes versions unless immutability was set with a flag most people never touch. No villains, just nudges that make ledgers harder to keep. So what counters that playbook without turning you into the story? Publish raw, duplicate often, mirror always. Lead with manifests, methods, and failure modes, not conclusions. Pair every chart with the exact command that made it. Keep your negative nights next to your positive ones, so cadence has a twin and critics can't claim cherry pick. If you found a prime anchor, show 3 ways it can be faked: codec smear, clock drift, self-similarity. Then rule them out with measurements anyone can rerun. Refuse centralization. Split custody from day one. 3 repositories, 3 owners, 3 jurisdictions. 1 immutable bucket with lifecycle locks. 1 university archive with public indexing. 1 peer-to-peer swarm that doesn't blink when a server does. Don't advertise redundancy. Assume you'll need it the morning a calibration banner lands. When they push compression residue, answer with the smallest rebuttal that holds. Checksums across independent captures, identical interval bins under different front ends, binary diffs that show payload bytes intact while file names changed. When they push context, widen your window and include the control nights that make the anomaly stand out. Pre-register bias windows before you pull, so you're not leaning the dice. When they push coincidence, publish your negative runs, then let others rerun your scripts on their rigs. Expect an educational push wrapped as literacy for schools and libraries. Offer the parallel class, how to sync a clock to a public NTP pool, hash a file, and annotate a log. Teach provenance without preaching belief. The more people who recognize the three-step clean when they see it, the less mileage euphemism buys. Resist cadence hijack by outrage. The schedule you're measuring will outlast any thread. Don't spend yourself on every taunt or think piece. Set your calendar to phase bias windows, not comments. Publish on schedule. Rotate roles so no one person becomes the single point of failure or pressure. Archive before retire. Hash before rename. Read calibration notes like literature, noting where phrasing repeats across instruments and eras. Finally, refuse motive as your currency. Meet every euphemism with a timestamp, every dampening with a duplicate, every joke with a method. You're not arguing for belief. You're building something that still stands when the next calibration rolls in. They win by making you loud. You win by making them late. And when the tick lands again, what moves the needle won't be volume. It will be a ledger that didn't blink. Final disclosure, the reason they hit it. By the time the schedule showed through blur and the ledgers made it hard to deny, motive stopped looking mysterious. They didn't hide a revelation. They hid a dependence. If a sub-ice metronome keeps time for layered infrastructure, launch cadence, debris dodges, grid maintenance, thermal budgets, then cadence is currency. Whoever controls the clock doesn't need to control the narrative. They just need the rest of us not to build a calendar from it. Think through their incentives. Open cadence invites perverse behavior. Traders will front-run the window. Launch directors will crowd it. Municipal planners will postpone critical work until the safe hour, stacking risk on the wrong days. And the loudest part of a public timetable is panic. Rumor-driven evacuations near corridors, families sleeping in cars because the lake fog's due, amateurs pointing lasers at tight formations because a forum said triangles mean purge. None of that makes the system safer. It makes it noisier when timing demands quiet. There's the operational layer, too. Space domain awareness didn't become real in 2025 because of belief. It became real because the sky filled with objects. AI-first monitoring, pop-up arrays before busy nights, commercial feeds folded into defense stacks. Those choices are posture under pressure. If your orbital hygiene and your launch windows get cheaper when the downbeat lands, you don't announce the bar line. You protect it. You narrow resolution where rulers lie flat. You deprecate provenance, so after the fact calendars can't bloom. You speak in calibration to buy a week of quiet. People want a cleaner villain. They must fear what we'd learn. The ledger points somewhere duller and more damning. They fear losing steering during the only minutes that matter. Admitting a planetary scaffold, guardian, jailer, or janitor transfers authorship. Timelines become public property. Schedules become bargaining chips. A dozen agencies and 100 contractors would suddenly share custody of a metronome no one can stop. Every tick would carry lawyers. Every blur would carry conspiracy. The work would slow exactly when timing demands it be quick. Inside those rooms, cadence is triov. You align when loss is lowest. You vent where signatures die fast. You stitch coverage so drift doesn't compound. That's not a secret you celebrate. It's a threshold you protect. And if you've already trained a workforce to treat calibration as clock notes, the safest public story is the one that keeps engineers honest without handing the crowd a ruler. There's one more truth, the kind that doesn't fit a press conference. If intent sits outside our grasp, function doesn't. The lattice behaves like maintenance on a world that drifts. It privileges phase over phrase, timing over talk. That reveals something uncomfortable. The most consequential system in our lives might not be ours. We live inside a timing regime we didn't build, and we benefit daily from a stability we don't author. That's not a plot twist. It's a posture problem. Institutions chose control over consent because complexity leaves them no other choice they trust. So they did what systems do when denial burns too much fuel. They softened edges where cadence could crystallize. They broke the ropes that let outsiders prove sequence. They wrote careful language that told engineers enough and the public nothing that could turn into a calendar. Stewardship on the inside, concealment on the outside, not to erase truth, but to prevent timing from becoming theater. The contractor wrote it in a margin and then walked away. They didn't hide a truth. They hid a dependence. That's the shape that holds. A heartbeat under ice keeps time. An institution protects windows. A community learns to keep ledgers because ledgers are the only thing that survive blur. The metronome will arrive on time tomorrow. If you need a reason they hit it, that's it. Not fear of knowledge. Fear of noise when silence is the only thing that makes the clock cheap. The new path. That's the cut line. The clock under ice wasn't counting down to panic, it was counting down to choice. You won't stop the heartbeat. You decide whether you meet it blind or on purpose. Archive the files before the retire banners land. Add verified logs to community repos with hashes in ink, not opinions. If you've got clean captures, post the raw and the method. Drop your city and a time-stamped note in the comments so the map stops being theirs alone. Subscribe if you want the next cadence window and the tools to catch it. Then go build the mirror they can't rename.